Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our review and explanations of the questions for using the IFS process, and then some. To start up this one, she told me that it would be good if I did a little review. Just to kind of orient. I'm taking for granted that people are going through these in order, and I agree it'd be helpful to orient a little bit. So we're making our way through, just a short recap, we're making our way through essentially this process of IFS. And on the top of this table, you can see we've got the kind of high level broad view, these kind of 9 different steps. And let me look, naming the issue and identifying parts, we haven't really even gotten to that yet. So as you scroll down, you got a little table for how to read this chart. And a lot of what we've been covering, actually, here we go, identifying parts. A lot of this, though, the purple is our questions or statements you can use really with any part. And yeah, we're identifying introjects here and identifying unburdening. Introjects is more of a Gestalt piece. So really, we're just getting started in IFS, essentially, like more IFS. We'll continue with the identifying parts. And last time I talked just a little bit about the family story. It's essentially a lineage burden on steroids. And I will create something separate from this for people to get access to that if they want. That'll probably be something that people have to pay for, but it'll be reasonably priced. And so, yeah, let's just keep going. Okay, got the thumbs up. And you can see it's great. It's working. Wonderful. All right, so we paused here at the family story by Arnold Patent. And so back to more identifying parts. So how do you feel toward that, whatever part you're working with, the protector, the manager, the firefighter, or whatever model you're using? This question easily is my favorite question in IFS. This is the most important question in the whole model. There are very important things baked into this question. 2 at least I'm going to talk about right now. How do you feel towards that part helps you identify how the person is relating to the part relative to whether they're in self or whether they're in another part. And this is absolutely critical for 2 reasons. If they're in another part, we're going to rewind, and I'm just using this chart, it's kind of a metaphor, but you're going to rewind and do more of the 5 Fs. Oh, quick sidebar. I'm going to make another video about the 5 Fs. I'll talk to Cherie. Maybe we'll just weave it into this. Maybe we'll talk about the 5 Fs next time. But I keep naming it, and I realize it'd probably be good if we just did a video on it. But my thought was people would be just more kind of familiar up to that point if they've read a bit about IFS, but that's probably not fair to assume. So, sorry, scrolling down. Oh, I missed it. I was scrolling up to see if maybe there's some reference to the 5 Fs, but there isn't even that. So shame on me. And we'll rectify that somehow. Either we'll go over it, I'll throw it in this table just so that it's there, and we'll do, maybe next time we'll just talk about it. Or I'll just do a separate video that won't be live. Maybe let me know in the comments if you have a preference. See what I did there? How do you feel towards that part? So okay, let's use an example. Let's say I'm helping Cherie with the part, and is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, well, we'll maybe like demo, but for now, let me just lay it out. But Cherie, you identified, a sad part, and where are you noticing it in your body? How's it responding to your attention? Doing some of that preliminary stuff, and then wait for it. Eventually, the moment of truth. Cherie, how are you feeling towards the sadness? So that can go one of two directions. Either Cherie will do a part. So can you do a version where it's a part?
Sure.
Yeah. So sure, I'm curious.
How do I feel toward the sadness?
Yeah, that you're noticing right now.
I wish I wasn't sad. It's kind of ridiculous.
Boom. All right. So here's the thing. If she says anything that isn't a self-led-ish quality, oh, I feel compassion. Oh, I feel curious. Oh, I feel interested. Then that's a part. That's another part. And the healing power of IFS, so much of it is in creating self-to-part relationships, not part-to-part relationships. And this is where Gestalt and IFS are a little bit different. And I personally am a little bit more flexible about this. I think I mentioned this last time. IFS really wants to establish as much self-to-part relationship as possible, ideally, eventually, within the client's relating to their parts from self with compassion, with curiosity. But at minimum, if that isn't on board, then there's self-to-part relating between you and the client. So when that is present, we'll just stay with that for no. I'll come back to that. So that's genre one. The first genre is self-to-part relationship. But what Cherie just role played and modeled is if she's feeling frustrated, angry, wants to change it in some way, then that's another protector part. And so then we have to keep our focus on the protector part, help it unblend. We're going to get to all that. And then after you do that work, do the 5 Fs, honor it, name the unmet need. If we're using NVC, it will eventually unblend, build some trust, contracting. We're going to get into all of that. Then you come back to this question. How do you feel towards the sad part now? And it could be another protector part. That is perfectly fine. You want to welcome every part. I have a colleague, Stephanie Small, and she used to say, I'm sure she still says it, she would say, hello and welcome, like kind of as a general, welcoming mantra. It's just her attitude. And that's one of the lovely things about IFS. You have that attitude for every single part. And I would just say extend it to anything you come across within your client. And then, like we talked about last time, getting into introjects, a certain kind of burden that we focus on a lot in Gestalt. If how the client is feeling towards the part isn't just a protector part, but it's mean or especially uncooperative, my antennas go up and I'm wondering, is there something here that's acquired? It could be really any authority figure, but it could be anyone who kind of overpowered or violated the client in some way. We get imprinted all the time, I think, with other people's energies and our experiences. And so I talked about that in the last video. If you're not clear about what I'm talking about, you can revisit that there. Okay, so we can check whenever we are in doubt or when we think sending a part self-energy would be helpful. So that's an important part, the point. The second piece, when we think sending the part self-energy would be helpful. So if let's say, Cherie, you're in a more compassionate place, just kind of step into that role towards the sadness. And if I have a sense of that, and or we've already established that, even if I've established that, I might ask Cherie, so Cherie, how do you feel towards the sadness now?
Oh, I feel compassionate toward it.
Okay. I want you to just send the part your compassion and just notice how it responds. Okay.
Just really appreciating that.
Wonderful. So the precursor to what I just showed you is the sad part. Let's say we've already established there's compassion there, but the sad part shares even more. You're witnessing. We're going to get to that, but the part's sharing about its experiences, and you simply have a sense that it would be good to just send it more self energy via that relationship. Then that's when you can always come back to this question. I do it all the time. Where I just want to take advantage of that. So I'll ask, oh, wow, interesting. The part just shared all of that. I wouldn't say that, but I'm thinking that. How do you feel towards the part now and hearing all of that? Because the thing is, one reason to revisit this question, even if self's already been established, you've already sent compassion, is as there's layers to this. As the exile, let's say, the sad part shares more and more and more, the compassion can get deeper and deeper and deeper. And so, you're facilitating that and just getting an intuitive sense, or from your experience, when to weave that in. That's where this becomes a little bit more art than science. And you kind of can't go wrong sending self energy. Similarly, I mentioned in an earlier video about the awareness continuum. What are you noticing now? What are you noticing now? That's another fallback question, statement. I do an exercise with my Naropa students where I set them up in dyads, and we practice just that question, meaning the therapists are only allowed to ask, what are you noticing now? What are you noticing now? And the client might share and report, oh, interesting. Okay, well, what are you noticing now in your body? So all the therapist is allowed to say. We don't do it for, more than just a few minutes. So it's not too obnoxious. But the students who are role-playing the therapist tend to feel surprised when they hear that the student client reports that actually felt great. You could have just kept asking that. Every time we tune in to our felt sense, it's like a form of meditation and mindfulness, and brings us more into the present moment. And there's always a healing quality to that. For those of you who are, really wanting to be very trauma informed and know how to kind of keep people in their window of tolerance, just simply slowing down, bringing them in the present moment, tuning into the felt sense, oftentimes for most people that actually is nourishing. So similar kind of attitude applies, kind of liberalness and how much you're going to use it with this question. How do you feel towards the protective part? All right, so okay, there's a distinction here that we're doing. So that I did in this table. So this first box here with identifying parts under family story, how do you feel towards that protector part? This is more of a 5Fs move. Eventually, and you would use this if you have a sense that this protector part isn't going to just step back. I don't remember if we got to that question. I don't think so. But old school IFS, before I think the 5Fs got a little bit, 5Fs have actually gotten reorganized. I'll go into this when we talk about the 5Fs, but when I first did the training, the 5Fs were one set of Fs, and then they were transformed more, by the time I did the level 2 training, they upgraded them. I think there were helpful nuances that they changed. But essentially there's just more of an emphasis now on taking your time with protector parts. So Peter asked a few videos ago, what do you do? I think it was along the lines of, what do you do with protector parts when they won't step back? So you can, of course, explore the introject piece, and you can simply treat it like an exile, like how we used to, like this question traditionally, the way I remember it in the level 1 training was, you kind of saved the how do you feel towards this part question when you finally uncovered something that was more vulnerable, and it was more of an exiled part. And then if there was another part that came in, the old school kind of first intervention is, could you just ask that part that's annoyed with the sadness to step back? And I'm pretty sure I have that in here, so I won't talk about it too much. But it's interesting watching someone like Dick essentially just get away with that, like not have to do a lot of 5Fs. I think in part, if not to a large degree, because of how much self-energy and confidence he embodies, and just how much experience he has, that when he's asking that, the protector parts are genuinely willing to do that. But it doesn't always go that gracefully. If you're focused on a sad part, how do you feel towards that part? I feel frustrated. Oh, could you ask the frustrated part if it would step back? And then if you get any kind of resistance to that, we're going to get into contracting and some other things you can try. But oftentimes, just stick asking that. It would work. And I don't do a ton of that, but I do use it every now and then. Sometimes that is all you need. All you have to do is ask the part to step back. If you get a sense that the protector part simply needs more attention, then you want to get a self to part relationship with the protector. And this is oftentimes where I think NVC works really well. How do you feel towards the firefighter? I wish you would just step back. It gets complicated because you're getting protector on the protector. But you can weave in, if you're playing translator, can you see how this protector part, just has a need for well-being, or has a need for safety? Oh, sure. Okay. Can you just let the protector part know that you get that it is just wanting to feel better. It is just wanting to keep things safe. And just that kind of empathy can help a firefighter relax, can help a protector part relax. Okay, let's keep going. It's interesting going through this like this, because it's so easy to branch off into other questions or statements that I know we're going to get to. It's such a tree. But how do you feel towards that protected exile part is a different context. I don't use the how do you feel towards that part question much with protectors. If I have a protector, I just want to work with it. I want to ask it to step back. I want to contract with it. I want to clean up whatever introjects are there. So this is more rare for me. I mainly use this question with exiles. The one caveat I'll say to that is if I'm really doing a lot of 5Fs with any particular protector part, and you can see that baked into this protector part, there's a lot of pain. It's almost like the protectors can have their own exiles. Dick talks about how IFS is fractal. The parts have self, and it's just all the way down. You can find kind of the same construction, and then all the way up, it just repeats itself. So, if you're in that mode, if you're, even just starting to feel a lot of compassion towards a protector part, or the client is, again, you can't go wrong in just sending some compassion for that part. So you could weave it in then. And the more you can do that, the more self to protector part relationship you can establish, the more easily it's going to unblend and want to genuinely unblend, so that you can get to the exile. They use, in my perception, and it could have just been my own bias there, and I still think this is true, if you're looking at the full arc of the IFS process, you're wanting to heal the exile, you're wanting to heal the trauma, and then the protector parts can so much more easily shift their roles. But it's a bit of a paradox, because you don't want to rush through that. If protector parts are there and they're not stepping back, then you have to just honor that, and you want to honor the pacing that creates and the rhythms that creates. And so that's a little bit what I'm speaking to in terms of when you would weave in, how do you feel towards that protector part? It's essentially a lot in the spirit of wanting to get a self to part relationship there. And then in the spirit of eventually getting it to trust everyone enough or heal enough so that we can get to what it is protecting. Okay, so let's go to the other version of this, which is what I use it more often with. How do you feel towards that protected exile part? We can check whenever we are in doubt or when we think sending apart self-energy would be helpful. This same kind of subtext applies. All right, we're just going to keep going. So self-to-part relationship, that's the category I give this next one. So if the feeling towards a part is positive, especially towards a protected exile part, can you send the part your curiosity, care, understanding, and notice how it responds? So capturing that impact. So this is what I spoke to earlier. This is so healing. And in my level 1 training, Tony Irvine Blank was just so great about in somatic experiencing, they call it pouncing on the resource. You know, this is definitely kind of a resource showing itself moment, and you never go wrong by just doubling down on it. So this is where a lot of the healing happens. Can you send the part your care, your love, your curiosity, and notice how it responds? Very, very integral step in all this. All right, so let's move on. Unblending, befriending. If the feeling towards a protected exile part is negative, so Cherie demonstrated that one, such as frustration, distrust, or dislike, you are dealing with the protector part or introject, and you can try to empathize with the protector part's need. Okay, so I spoke to this. So it sounds like this part needs safety, respect, boundaries. Can you let this part know that you get it, that you understand that? If the need you named is correct. So let me pause here for a moment. This is what I would prefer to do instead of getting into, oh, well, how do you feel now towards that part? And this is what I see in some circles, that it starts to get into that, and then you're just naming part after part after part, and it can get really confusing. I mean, not confusing per se, but you end up with the question of, oh, well, where do I start? And sometimes there could be 5, 6, 7 parts. So that is why I try to keep the how you feel towards that part mainly focused on the exile. And then once I get a part that is a protector part, I want to work with it. I'm not too concerned in how the client relates to that part, because then you start to get a little bit lost in the weeds, and there's all these protectors and you're not sure where to focus, and it's not necessary in my experience. It is enough for you to stay self-led, for you to do more direct access interventions, like the NVC move. It sounds like this part's needing safety. It sounds like this part's needing well-being. Yep, it says that's exactly right. As soon as you get that kind of confirmation, you can feel the protector part relax, or the client will feel the protector part start to soften. This is essentially in the spirit of the 5 Fs, like kind of a 5F move, where you're just focused on honoring the protectors, getting to know them, seeing what they need. And here we go. Okay, when I was scrolling up and I'm like, I know the 5 Fs are in here somewhere, like it's kind of baked in. Here it is baked in. So befriending is one of the 5 Fs. Befriending the protectors. So this is NVC is a lovely befriending move. All right, so let's keep going. If the protector part's need isn't clear, it's more empathic to try and guess, as opposed to asking what the need is. This is an NVC hack. So if I'm naming NVC this, NVC that, and you're like, what is he talking about? Watch the only video I've recorded thus far. It's the first video we ever made on nonviolent communication. But I'm gonna just walk you through it a little bit. It might be a review. I may have touched on this. I love NVC and I use it all the time, or I try to. There's a main skill in NVC, it's a conflict resolution model. So it's got steps in terms of how you would speak nonviolently. And in a nutshell, it's when you share the observable behavior, I felt, name a feeling, because it didn't meet my need for, and then they identify needs as universal needs. These are needs that every person has at different times, but they're universal. We can all relate to them. Maybe not in a particular moment, but sometimes, sure, yeah. Sometimes I want boundaries also, or sometimes I have a need for space also. And then the last step is making a clear and specific request, also ideally an observable behavior around how the person could meet my need. If I don't have it structured that way, it's really easy for the communication to be quote unquote violent. And his definition of that is essentially it's when we talk in a way where we're blaming the other person or we're criticizing the other person, or this kind of victim-ish mentality baked into it. And it's a beautiful process. Like even really the heart of NVC is the needs step. I've worked at summer camps where we use a lot of conflict resolution, and we would just say, when you did this, it makes me feel sad. And what I want is, for you to not just take my cookie. That works. It's actually a kind of a deeper way of communicating, like we discussed around authentic relating, when you're giving feedback. So more times than not, if there's goodwill, a kind of a good faith intention to work things out, hearing that is going to touch the other person, because I think on kind of not even that deep of a level, but on deeper levels, we don't want to hurt other people. If we're not too numbed out and protected, that touches us. So even just sharing something like that can really create more understanding and connection and collaboration and empathy. And it is cleaner and more powerful if instead of blaming the person for how you feel, and this is going to sound very Republican, you can connect the feeling to what your need is. Because NVC is really more of a differentiated model. It just supports more differentiated and responsibility, and essentially saying that we are responsible for what we feel. Someone may take a cookie and one person feels really offended, and the other person is like, oh, I love that they love my cookies, and I must have made a really delicious recipe. How flattering. Take more cookies. And so who is the person who took the cookie responsible for the feeling of offense versus the feeling of gratitude? No. Obviously, they act as the catalyst, but we are responsible for what we feel. And tying it back to your unmet need is much cleaner. It's really just a powerful step. All right, so all that said, and we're going to try to speak in this kind of giraffe, he calls it that giraffe speak versus jackal, which is the more violent way of speaking. That's one way you could frame it. And when I work with couples and families, I hardly ever use any of that. What I am more focused on is listening in giraffe. And so another core concept in NVC is that sometimes people are going to speak giraffe, but a lot of times, especially if someone's dysregulated, they're going to speak jackal. They're going to blame. They're going to, use judgmental language. But you always have the opportunity to listen to them in giraffe. So there's speaking in giraffe, but there's listening in giraffe. And if you study NVC, learning how to listen to giraffe, that's really the life-changing skill, kind of micro skill baked into the model. And so what's listening in giraffe? According to NVC, no matter what people are doing or saying, they're expressing an unmet need. even if someone's coming at me with a lot of attack thoughts or attack energy, baked into that is some universal need that I can relate to. And in terms of anger management techniques, an external person being able to just stay in contact and hear the unmet need, it's one of the most disarming things you can do. So I absolutely love that aspect of NVC. And when I work with couples, I have folks practice that. It's a very much a basic skill, wax on, wax off. We're just going to try to master. Really, it's a type of consciousness. It's a level of consciousness where you're seeing the world. You know how in A Course in Miracles, you do all these meditations, and one of the goals is to get to this place where you can just see the world more through God's eyes, or they call it Christ vision. This one skill is the only thing I have found. I'm sure there's more, but it's just a tangible, practical way to tap right into that consciousness, which I think is pretty profound and amazing. I can't overstate that enough. And so all that said, that's just to try to sell you on, learn how to strengthen your giraffe ears and share that skill with your clients, support and facilitate that. That piece is what's baked into this step for me. You're essentially, as a therapist, you have your giraffe ears on. You can name the needs. And the point being, I went into that whole subtext because I see IFS therapists. NVC kind of made its way into the IFS culture a little bit. Folks here and there, I think, have presented on it at the conference, and I've presented twice, and I always weave this in. But there is a bit of a culture in IFS. It hasn't quite taken a hold in as clear a way as I'm describing. What I hear more, and it's not a bad question to ask, but when you're with someone and you're wanting them to be empathetic, it feels very different if they say, well, what do you need right now? Versus saying, it seems like you need some support right now. There's something about making the guess, taking the effort to make a guess, that feels more loving, and it is more supportive. I'll just explain on a very practical level. It's one of the reasons why Gestalt tries to stay away from asking questions. When you ask someone a question, like, well, what do you need right now? You're now asking them to do a certain kind of work. And if they're upset enough, they may not have the bandwidth for it. And asking any question might feel like just more dysregulating. But if you take that on, and you're willing to be the surrogate frontal lobe and give it a guess, even if you're wrong, it feels better. And you don't park it there if you're wrong. You keep making guesses until you get it right, and there's something that resonates for the person in terms of the unmet need. So I hear IFS folks sometimes just saying, oh, well, see what the part needs, or ask the part what it needs. Again, that can be a fine thing to ask here and there. There are actually times where that is what you want to ask. And just play around and practice just naming the needs yourself. And here's a nuance that's important. And I redirect clients sometimes with this. If a client asks the part, well, what do you need? I always redirect that. That's kind of a parенtifying move. You don't want to put that kind of responsibility or burden on a younger part, and parts are almost always younger. So I just think about it in terms of parenting almost exclusively. But what I might cue the client to do is to have the client guess, what do you think this part's need is? And that's golden. That's good. Like if the client's present moment self, adult present moment self, can give that kind of giraffe empathy, that's fine. And if they can't, I might offer a suggestion. Then they check it out with the part, and we're wanting to navigate it in that way. Yeah.
That's
Does that make
brilliant.
sense? Yeah, it's just such an important, valuable part of NVC. And play around with this. I mean, if what I'm saying makes sense, and like, oh my goodness,
Totally makes sense.
good. Practice this in your life, like, and you can set context with the partner or a good friend. Just, I mean, I'll share a little story since we're getting lost in these NVC weeds. When I used to go to an NVC practice group, we ended the meetings, whatever time was left. It could be 5 minutes, it could be 10 minutes. It's usually about 10 minutes. We'd break up into little groups and practice just giving each other empathy. And people, these folks were such, NVC zealots, bless their heart. I loved it. I learned so much from them. Bonnie Sundance, hopefully she's still around. She's a Boulderite, old school Boulderite, just an amazing NVC person. So she would run these groups at Unity Church in Boulder. And so we'd break up into these groups, and these old school, very experienced NVC folks would treat that time like it was like gold. And so they would say, okay, how much time do we have left? We got 3 people in this little tiny group. That's 3 minutes each. Okay, let's go. You're gonna go first. We're gonna just give you empathy. And they really valued it. And I remember one of the first times I was there, I was going, and I'm like, oh, this feels a little weird, and the tension, and I'm not sure what I'm supposed to say. And it was so amazing. I think it was Bonnie, actually. She said something like, oh, wow, it sounds like right now you're just needing a little bit of space. And I almost started crying. It cut through everything. And she was just connecting the way Marshal Rosenberg talked about it with what was alive inside of me. You can do this all the time with everything. I'll just share one other story about this, very similar, because it's funny, and it involves Marshal Rosenberg. So I also did a training with a couple different trainings with Marshal Rosenberg when he was alive. He passed away a few years ago, and I was working at a juvenile facility. Essentially, it was a facility that children were either coming from juvie, or it captured them before they went to juvie, and it was a chance to either do some work before they went back into the community, or avoid juvie altogether. And so, having worked at these summer camps and working with all these teenage boys who were wonderful humans, it was really lovely work with them. We had just the greatest. This was Alternative Homes for Youth. They're still running out in Greeley. But the director was amazing. She let me bring in IFS to the team, and we trained IFS. And before we got to that, like, I wish we had like a conflict resolution restorative here. It'd be, so helpful, because, the teenagers were over the last piece of bacon. That was like our running joke, but it was a real thing. About the smell of bacon just brought out the worst in people. Lifelong vegetarian, so I can't relate to any of that. But I saw it go down. It was interesting. And so the flyer for Marshal Rosenberg had no idea who he was. See if it's a good vehicle, and then we can bring that in. So I go to the training. It completely blows my mind. I'm like, holy shit, this is what I've waited for my whole life. Really, camp was, because just conflict resolution was I did not grow up. Learn this whole other like upgraded version of it. So I rush him during the break, and I'm so excited, and I'm telling him about the facility, and I'm like, we need this. Like, what would I use for the trainings so we can get everyone on board? And we used to do this at camp, and he looks at me and he goes, it sounds like the staff is really stressed and they're needing support. I almost start crying again. And my thought was, oh, he's older. Maybe he didn't hear what I said. So I repeat myself. I go through the same thing. I asked the question, and it took years before I realized what it was he was doing. He was listening to me with giraffe ears. And every time he responded, he brought me to the verge of tears. And then eventually, I think he got tired it. And he's like, oh, the basics of nonviolent communication. Why don't you just start with that? But he was just doing NVC. He was doing his thing. He wanted connection before correction, which is an NVC thing. So all that to say, this giraffe ears, just practice in your life wherever you can. Just hearing the Oh, I think we're back. I don't think so.
You want me to write something in the chat if I'm able to?
Sure.
Okay.
Just explain what's going on. Upload speed. You know what? Some of this might be because of the VPN.
You've got all these rainbows on your face.
Cool.
No,
No, it might
it's
be.
actually distracting. I don't think that's a good idea.
Yeah. Oh, are we back? I think we might be back.
Okay.
Successfully connected. All right. Sorry, everyone. I'm not sure where it left off. Great, Peter. Thank you. Peter, what was the last thing you remember me saying? And I think what we might do, and if we can't clarify that, we'll just pause this one here. We were offline for like 5 minutes, it felt like. And so tell me what was the last thing you heard me? Can't quite remember it. No, that's perfectly fine. I will see that as a sign to pause things. Yeah, I saw. So let me just ask this. Does anyone have any questions so far? Anything I've shared? We can just do a little Q&A if anyone's got anything. And if not, we'll go ahead and end this one here. I'll watch the video, see where we left off, and then next time we will just pick up there. I think that's the best thing. I started going into story mode about giraffe empathy.
Well, you were talking about.
But we don't know when it disconnected exactly,
true.
so
Okay.
it doesn't. Well, we, yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
So that's what. Oh, bacon brings out the worst in people. Okay. Yes. Okay, I can pick up there. All right. Thank you, Peter. You shared the stream, so we'll keep going. All right. So wanted to bring in a conflict resolution model to alternative homes for youth. And I happened right at that time to come across a flyer that Marshal Rosenberg was, hold on, I'm just gonna find where I was. This is way down. Family story, we're here. Where Marshal Rosenberg gave a lecture on IFS, not on IFS, on NVC. And it completely blew my mind. I was thinking, you know, up until the break, they had a break in the middle of it. I'm like, this is it. We'll bring this in. It'll help so much. So I rushed him during the break. I went to talk to him, and I was so excited and amped up. So I was explaining about the facility and the camp I've worked at, and I want a version of that for this facility. And what could we use? You know, I wanted very specifically, which training program should we use to train the staff? And he looks at me and he said something like, it seems like you all are needing some support, and you're feeling frustrated and needing support. And I thought he didn't hear me. And at the same time, he brought me to the verge of tears. But I didn't understand what he was doing. He was giving me empathy, but none of that registered. I simply thought, oh, he must have not heard me. So I repeated again. He empathizes with me again. And at this point, I was confused around what was going on. So I said it like 3 or 4 times until I finally broke him down. But each time he's empathizing with me, and it was just really sweet. And so I just find it ironic that was my first introduction to NVC, my first experience with him. And it took years before I even realized what he was doing. And now it's the main thing that I train people in with NVC, is just hear the need. So all of that is just to try to encourage you to practice this, and you can practice with anyone. It's very worthwhile. Very worthwhile skill. So then the last piece here, if the protector part's need is not clear enough to guess, the last resort is to ask, what is this part needing? I'm curious if during the freeze, did I go into, Peter, do you remember this? I was talking about the kind of the nuance of a client like making a guess around a need for the part versus just asking the part. I did. That was before the stories. Yes, okay, great. Yeah. All right, so let's just keep going. I think we can fit in a little bit more before we're done today. All right, so the next box, unblending / befriending. Again, it's another one of the F's, even though it starts with the B. Friending. If the feeling towards the part is negative, such as frustration, distrust, or dislike, empathize with why this part may judge the target part. This is just a version of MVC. Of course, it makes sense why you may not like these uncomfortable feelings. Or you could say, let it know you understand its need for safety, control, calmness. So we're using MVC there. How does it respond? Capture the impact of such empathy. So either of those options, you know, if you're saying, yeah, of course, it makes sense, you know, throw that out there if it feels genuine to you. And most of the times it makes complete sense. You know, why another part wouldn't want to feel sad. You just let them know you get it. Of course, I get it. I'm with you. Creates a therapeutic alliance. Or you go a little bit next level. You throw in a need. You name a need. Oh yeah, of course it makes sense. You know, you have a need to feel calmness, or you have a need for well-being. Capture the impact of empathy. How does it respond? And this is where we get to more of the old school unblending. Would this part be willing to step back and let you see if you can help this exile part? Exile is implied. So you go into that, you go into the just asking it to step back. If this empathy seemed to have a positive impact, then you maybe have created enough leverage, enough self-led leverage to just go ahead and ask the part to step back. And or, again, if the empathy seemed to have a positive impact, you check it out. Does this part feel like it can trust you? Implied is trust you enough. We'll get to trusting a little bit more. I have some more on it in the table further down, but I've mentioned it. Trust is the bridge. I think I mentioned it in the first video. Trust is the bridge. Like if there's no trust, there really isn't any moving forward. And you don't always have to check this out. If things seem, self-connected enough, it's fine. But almost not any time, but oftentimes if anything stalls out between a protector part and trying to communicate with an exile, or even exile, to the client, I ask, does this part feel like it can trust you? This is right along the lines of the age question that we covered previously. When things start to stall out, you can fall back to that. This is how aware of this part. How aware of you is this part? Or does this part feel like it can trust you? You use them in the same way sometimes. Okay, so we'll keep going. Next box. So unblending, actually, let me rewind a little bit. When did we first start to talk about unblending? I should have done this earlier, but I think for the last few minutes, let's just talk about unblending, because now we're getting into a whole different step and phase of the work. Just going to go up here and check. Yeah, so we've gone from naming the issue and identifying the parts to now we want to go and unblend and create more of a self to part relating. And this is, if you remember the story of how Dick created IFS, he was using an empty chair dialogue with folks and just having people put protector parts out on chairs. And then as he was doing that, sometimes it would reach this critical mass where all of a sudden, out of nowhere, clients started to feel clients started to feel compassion, clarity, curiosity towards these protector parts that they were unblending, and he hadn't done anything to try to engineer that. It was inherent, and that blew Dick away, because at the time he had been trained that isn't how people are wired, that they need to be taught how to be compassionate, not that it was hardwired somewhere. And this is why Dick's a really, really big fan of unblending. It's such an important piece to this model. So I should have named that earlier as we were making the transition into these questions. This section, we're now getting into, we've named everything. Now we're moving into, we're going to try to unblend protectors from the exiles. We almost always have a sense that underneath it all is some pain, some trauma, some suffering, and that's what we're wanting to get to. But we have to unblend the protectors enough to then be able to even access the exile sometimes. But really, I'm misspeaking. Unblending is about getting the client in self. Like fundamentally, it's about just creating enough self-presence, and then you just work with whatever needs work with, whether it's a protector part or an exile. But over time, you're going to eventually get to the exile and do a few things, which we're going to get to later. Should have gave that whole preamble beforehand, but I apologize, it's a little disjointed. So the unblending all falls under the befriending piece. Okay, so how far did we get here? Can you ask? Okay, so here we have, we'll just keep going a little bit. Can you ask that protector / manager part to relax, step back, referencing Dick? I've seen him use that a lot. So I've spoken, I think, enough to that one already. So we'll keep going. So now we're back to identifying parts a little bit. So if the part, let's say, because you've empathized with it and then it's able to step back, or you for whatever reasons got away with just asking the part to step back, now you come back to we call it the core question. How do you feel now towards the target part? Let's call it an exile that you're ultimately wanting to get to. And if here you get a self-led quality, then you can move forward. So send it. Okay, it's great. Send it that curiosity. Notice how it responds, and then you can move forward to parts of this table further down, which we'll get to. But for now, here we're gonna explore other things that happen. So let's say the part says, you know, we're getting into contracting now. So I'm going to be aware enough to name that and to pause here. Contracting, if you remember, if you, like a good IFS student, have at least memorized this table, hint, hint, memorize it, do it. You will know that we're now into step 3. The last step with working with protectors, step 3. So let me pause here. When we come back next week, we're going to pick up here. I'll do a short overview again of how far we've gotten, and then we're going to dive right into contracting. I'm going to remember, or Cherie's going to remind me, hopefully, that I'm going to explain contracting a little bit on a broad level, and then we're going to dive into the questions and flesh that one out. Yeah, okay, I think that's good. All right, well, everyone, thank you for joining us. I apologize for the technical difficulties. It's fun to go through all of this, and I hope it's a helpful resource. And we'll see you next week if you can make it.